the Westchester Buddhist Center, we have been going through the lives of some of the great teachers. And we read the biography of Marpa. Marpa was the founder of the Kagyu sect. Well, let's just say he was the first Tibetan in the Kagyu lineage. Kagyu is one of the four main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama's Gelugpa. Man at the top there, on the top left, is Nyingma. And Ponlop Rinpoche, I think, is Kagyu, isn't he? Kagyu Nyingma? Yeah. Trungpa Rinpoche was born Kagyu, but his root guru was Nyingma. So that the Nyingmas and the Kagyus were very close. They sort of went back and forth, teacher to student to teacher to student. And there's a picture of the Karmapa up there on the upper right. He's the head of the Kagyu order. Starting with he's the 17th, and the first Karmapa lived, I guess it must be in about the 11th century. And there's Khenpo Tsultum Gyatso, who is Kagyu as well, and a teacher of Ponlop Rinpoche. So we're very much Kagyu here, as well as Nyingma. And the Kagyu lineage started with some Indian teachers, Talopa, who passed the teachings on to another Indian named Naropa, and whose main student was Marpa, Marpa being the first Tibetan. And the reason I'm talking about Marpa is that I bear a very faint echo of similarity with him tonight. When Marpa made his second trip to India, he collected a lot of teachings. He was there for some years. I forget how many. One time he went for 12 years, another time for 3, another time for 17, I think, third time. And on his way back, he had all these texts and that he had collected, and he met a fellow student that they'd come from Tibet together, and they had separated, and they began to, on the way back, they were traveling together, and they talked about what they had experienced and what the teachings they had received. And this other fellow got very jealous. He felt that Marpa had gotten better teachings than he. And so when they were crossing a river on a ferry boat, small ferry being poled across a river, this fellow rocked the boat and managed to tilt all of Marpa's texts that he'd collected in India into the river. And he lost them. And of course he was very distraught. But then when he got back to Tibet, he later realized that the teachings that he had really understood, he remembered and could still teach. And it was the ones that he hadn't understood so well that had perished, that he couldn't remember and had really gone down with the waters of the river. And I'm telling you this because I forgot my notes tonight. Which is, huh? Oh, look at all those little stickies she's put on front of her text. She's really working that book. How many of you have read the chapter tonight besides Sarah? Anybody? Oh, good. Good. And I'll just tell you for your amusement, since we're talking about sense of humor, that's the topic of this chapter. Back in the 1970s, and I was very much looking for some kind of a path. And I had heard Ram Dass speak, and I thought he was terrific, although he wasn't going to be my teacher, but he turned me out of the idea of looking for a path to work on myself. And I tried just about everything you can imagine, from psychoanalysis to going up and sitting for a while in a Benedictine monastery upstate New York called Mount Savior Monastery, and Zen, and I remember going to the apartment of one Hilda, her name was, who was a devotee of Sai Baba. And Sai Baba was an Indian saint, Hindu, who was famous for producing miracles, and the most famous miracle was that he could produce Shiva Lingam. The Shiva Lingam is the symbol of the male sexual energy, and it's generally just sort of a block, of stone, often, of different sizes, and some of them are huge. And Sai Baba was famous for being able to produce Shiva Lingam out of his mouth, and they would come out like eggs, one after the next, they'd be coming out. He'd be catching them like this, and we'd go to Hilda's apartment, where she would be dressed in a sari, Western woman, and had a 16mm projector and would show us movies of Sai Baba producing Shiva Lingam out of his mouth on the walls of her apartment. She would show these movies. So just to tell you how much I tried. And and then I heard that this fellow Chögyam Trungpa was coming to New York, and a friend of mine was going to go hear him, and I decided to go along with. But it turned out Trungpa Rinpoche hadn't been able to get, his name is Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. So sometimes he's called Chögyam Trungpa and sometimes Trungpa Rinpoche. Rinpoche is a title, kind of like Monsignor. It's a title for a High Lama. So he told me that Trungpa Rinpoche was coming, and I went with him. But Trungpa Rinpoche had been he'd emigrated from England to Canada, was the first stop, and he hadn't been able to get a visa. And so one of his students walked in and gave the talk, and I'm still very close friends with that student. His name was Richard Arthur, and he went by the name of Kungadawa, which was his refuge name. And he gave the talk, and I liked it a lot. So later, when Trungpa Rinpoche did come, I think it was in February or March of 1970, I went to hear him. And the topic of his talk was sense of humor. And I was really trying really hard to master all this stuff, and I remember sitting in full lotus, if you can believe I could do that in those days, on the floor, and this sort of roly-poly little guy comes in a suit and tie, accompanied by a young girl in a miniskirt, and that was his wife. I didn't know at the time, Diana. She was an English girl that they had married before they came over here, and I spent the talk trying not to look up her skirt at her underwear, which was prominently displayed right, or at least I felt prominently. And he gave a talk on a sense of humor, which I thought was the least bit funny. And I just left uninterested, with no desire to continue to pursue a relationship with this man, because I thought he'd given a rather boring talk and hadn't told a single joke. And but then one thing led to another, and by accident, kind of, I wound up meeting him again, and that was in July of that year, 1970, and that meeting was quite profound for me, changed my life, and set me off on a course, and I became his student, and have been a student of his ever since. So, sense of humor. In those days, he was very concerned with the issue of spiritual materialism. And spiritual materialism is still an issue today. It's just not quite as colorful as it was back then. What spiritual materialism refers to is the desire to self-aggrandize using spirituality. There are three basic modalities for materialism. One is using things, stuff, money, material forms. You collect food, wealth, clothing, riches, and you hope to achieve happiness by doing this. You can reverse that too, and you can become an ascetic, and you can live in a very austere life, and that's can be if you're trying to achieve some form of happiness through that, a form of materialism as well. You know, you can go off and create your little Zen cabin on the mountain and listen to water dripping from the bamboo and have your teeny little tatami mat and, you know, piece of artwork on the wall and live a very austere, simple life, eating nothing but shoots and leaves if you're a panda. And that can be sort of reversing the more normal meaning of the word materialism. So that's one form of materialism, is that one arranges the material things of one's life in order to achieve some form of happiness. And the second modality is that one subscribes to a system or systems of thought which you use to seek to order your life in a way that's going to bring happiness of one kind or another. It might be meaning, it might be idealism, it might be virtue, it might be a religious philosophy that you order your life according to, or it might be a political philosophy. You know, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, and you see some kind of virtue in that and achieve a kind of happiness by subscription to a set of ideas and concepts. And you might even order your life around those ideas in one degree or another. I mean, as an undergraduate and then a graduate student in those days, in the 60s, my field of study was Chinese history. And in graduate school, I focused on Chinese communism because it was really happening at that time. It was the Cultural Revolution, and it was a very interesting phenomenon. And I still feel that Chinese communism was then, and for some time after, probably the most profound form of this kind of materialism that perhaps the world has ever seen, because the Chinese communists were ordering life according to a set of conceptual ideals and prescriptions in a very, very, very rigid and thorough way. And you know, everybody was carrying around the little red book, and it went much deeper than that. So that's the second modality. And then the third modality is that one can use spirituality itself to try to achieve some form of happiness. And there are many different styles of this. This is spiritual materialism. And this is really what Trungpa Rinpoche was talking about back in the 70s. And it's still always an issue. It never ends on the path, as long as one is on the path, as long as one is not fully enlightened. Spiritual materialism is always an issue, because what it's about is the tendency that we have, or not the tendency, but the desire to achieve some kind of personal, ego-centered benefit from our spiritual endeavors. So we want to feel happier, we want to feel wiser, we want to feel more skillful, we want to be admired, whatever it might be. All kinds of things that we want to get from our efforts to tread the path. And it becomes subtler and subtler the further we go along the path, because we become more sophisticated and we also become more processed. We actually become wiser and more closer and closer to enlightenment. And the spiritual materialism, that self-aggrandizement, becomes more and more subtle, thinner and thinner. And in fact, they say of the bodhisattva is the person at the middle stage of the path who is just, who's very close, moving towards enlightenment. The first stage of the path, first of all, there's not even, for those people who have not even entered the path, but are just interested, right? So there's that stage. That's for people who perhaps are meditating. They might be trying out meditation, or they might be meditating in order to feel better. They want to calm themselves, do better at work, deal with stress reduction. That's sort of pre-path. There's no real spiritual element to there. It's just a matter of manipulating your mind in order to calm yourself. Instead of using a drug to calm yourself, you can use concentration practices, where you focus your mind one-pointedly on an object, and you step out of the disturbing, difficult thoughts that can make one so upset. And then, at some point, one begins to actually enter the path. And what constitutes entering the path is when you begin to want to attack the problem of suffering in a fundamental way. And you begin to study the teachings, and in three ways. These are called the three prajnas, and they are, the prajna is like a form of wisdom. And these three prajnas are study, that you intellectually study like we're doing now, meditation, and contemplation. Through contemplation, you take the intellectual teachings and you begin to think about them in terms of your life. And you sort of test them. Are they true? Can I see them in action? Can I see them being played out? They say that study brings an intellectual kind of wisdom, that an intellectual understanding, which is genuine, bona fide. It's still only intellectual. It's you haven't really absorbed it, but it's important because it opens up possibilities to you. You begin to see new ideas that you hadn't contemplated before, such as, for instance, that Buddhism teaches that one of the three major marks of existence is that what we call an I, this thing, this me, is nothing more than a lie, a fiction. It's not true. It doesn't exist. It has no true existence. It's simply a story that is told up here from time to time. And those times can be pretty often. Can fill our days. We go, only thing, I walk down the street, I'm worried about this, I wish that hadn't happened, that so-and-so said this to me. It's all about me, I, and it's all about the past and the future. So the first prajna, study, begins to open up new possibilities. I mean, that's a pretty radical possibility, isn't it? That I is just a fiction, a lie. That's pretty earth-shaking. And then you begin to study this, and you might develop some intellectual conviction that this is in fact the case. And then you begin to combine that with meditation experience. And meditation experience goes beyond just simple calming of the mind, and it becomes, and this is very important for it, that it has to become, there are two main strains of meditation practice in Buddhism. There's what's called shamatha, and shamatha literally means, in the Sanskrit and in the Tibetan, shine, it means abiding in peace. And what it's all about is calming your mind. And this is where, when you practice shamatha, you can achieve calm. The Buddhists call it the common practice because it's also taught in the Hindu tradition, as opposed to the other second practice, which I'm coming to. And it's really the basis of stress reduction, what's being done in hospitals, the Jon Kabat-Zinn approach. It's the idea of focusing your mind and coming back out of those disturbing, anxious thoughts about the past and the future into focus on an object, bringing yourself out of that. The other main kind of meditation, though, in Buddhism is absolutely important. It's essential. Without it, you don't really step foot on the path. And that's called vipassana in Sanskrit, or vipassana, for those of you who might be familiar with the Pali, the Theravada Southeast Asian tradition. Jack Kornfield, Joe Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, they call it vipassana. And it's usually translated as either insight meditation or awareness meditation, awareness practice. And that is where you begin to actually experience and understand in an experiential way these truths that you've been studying, such as egolessness, and other things that are offered to you in the intellectual sides of the teachings. So that's the second prajna. And in the third prajna is contemplation. And by contemplating the experience that you have in your meditation practice and the intellectual study, and bringing those two together so that you begin to see the truth or the living quality of the words in your experience, you begin to develop doubtlessness. And that is what contemplation brings. is freedom from doubt, or certainty that these teachings, that these experiences that you're having, and that these insights that you're gaining are actually true. And so these are the three prajnas. Spiritual materialism is all about being stuck in the idea of me, of ego, and that I am going to get something out of this. Now, back in the 70s, it was rife. Everybody, Eastern religion had sort of just landed. And, it had been there a little before with people like Alan Watts, and before that with Jack Kerouac and, the Beats. But nobody really understood it, and especially the Buddhism. But in the 60s, the Beatles were students of, what was his name, Mahesh Yogi, and Rennie Davis of the Chicago 7, the political activist. He was a student of the Satguru, this little kid, Hindus, and there were all kinds of people around teaching Kundalini yoga, and raising your Kundalini, or the energy that goes in your spine through your chakras, and getting blissed out. And people were going on all kinds of food trips. I was macrobiotic for a year, the thinnest I've ever been in my adult life. God, who was it who said you can never be too rich or too thin? But I think I was too thin. And everybody was trying to get something, from spirituality. They were, if only I can, get really pure, like I wear all whites. I'm going to say Hare Krishna all day long. I'm going to wear white clothes. I'm going to eat nothing but vegetarian. I'm going to eat rice and dal and boiled vegetables, and then I'll be holy, and I'll love God, and I'll achieve bliss, and I'll, be some kind of happiness. And Rinpoche was saying, and Trungpa Rinpoche just attacking it right and left, because it's egotism. It's all about, me, self-aggrandizing, and it doesn't work much. For most people, and if it does, then it's really dangerous. You can become a real sort of monster, really egotistical person. And there have been those around, and I won't name names, at least not for public consumption on a video. So he was attacking the idea of spiritual materialism, and basically what he was saying was, you've got to work with what you are, with who you really are, We have to work with what's going on inside us. And I remember him looking at us one day and saying, you're all looking for a way out of this dilemma, this suffering. And he said, but it's not a matter of finding the way out, it's a matter of finding the way in. Everybody was looking for communes. We wanted, and I was living in Boulder, Colorado, which was commune heaven. There were more communes there, I think, than any other part of the United States. They were all over the place around us. There were the Brainerd Lake family up on Peak to Peak Highway. There was, what was the name of that commune? There was a commune down in southern Colorado that was made up of LA studio musicians, session artists, and then there was the Pygmy farm. The Pygmies all came and became students of Trungpa Rinpoche, and they were all over the place. And people wanted Trungpa Rinpoche to start a commune. And when we bought the land, one of Rinpoche's students inherited $100,000 from Jonathan Eric, and he gave it all to the Sangha. And with half of it, we bought what is now Shambhala Mountain Center up in the Colorado Rockies, bought 640 acres for $50,000, $60,000. And with the other half, we bought what is now Karme Choling up in Vermont. They both became centers. And Jonathan's dead now. He died of multiple sclerosis. And that stopped me for a second there. I was thinking he was a good friend. And I remember we had a meeting at Trungpa Rinpoche's house, and the Pygmies, he loved the Pygmies. The Pygmies were this commune of people. Some of these communes were really not so nice. The Brainerd Lake family was very aggressive people, sort of a little scary. But the pygmies were really sweet, and they just were so generous. They didn't have any money, but they were generous, and they gave things. I mean, they gave Trungpa Rinpoche a beat-up, ancient, bright yellow Karmann Ghia. That was our car to drive around in. And they made all their money making hash pipes out of antlers. Those were the days. And doing more drugs than any human beings I'd ever seen. And so when we got the land, they all wanted. What had happened was that I'm telling stories now, but these are fun. They had lived out on east of Boulder. They had rented a house and they had land out there. And there were maybe, I don't know, 20 of them or 25, 30, something like 20, 30 people living out on this property. And they made the mistake, an American guru named Steve Gaskin. Anybody heard of him? He had a commune in California called The Family. And he decided to move it from California to South Carolina, North Carolina. And they were driving through Boulder, and they needed a place to land. And the pygmies said, "Oh, stay with us." Well, the owner of their property didn't take too kindly to that, and he booted everybody off. And so the pygmies went down to southern Colorado, where there was this realtor in town who owned this ancient motel. Anybody ever seen the movie with Humphrey Bogart, Petrified Forest? No? Oh, it's a great movie. You should see it sometime. Leslie Howard. Takes place in a motel in the middle of the desert. That was this motel. I mean, it could have been. This motel was abandoned. And I went down there and visited them there. And they were living in these rooms and it was a hot springs hotel in the middle of the desert, surrounded by mountains. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains, the Blood of Christ Mountains in the west, so named because when the sun, in the east, so named because when the sun set, they turn bright red. And this valley is this flat desert valley at altitude, and it got very cold in the winter. And these hot springs in the middle, and originally when the hotel had been operating, you could rent a room and fill up your tub with this sulfurous water, from the hot springs. Well, the tubs were filthy. But there was this swimming pool, and the pygmies filled it up with water, with this hot water. And I went down there to visit them one weekend in the winter, and they were getting wrecked on LSD, and then they would jump into the swimming pool, and it was like at night it dropped down to 40 below, in the San Luis Valley. And they'd be in the pool, and they'd freeze on the top, and then they'd roll over, and then they'd freeze on the bottom, and then they'd roll over like that. This is the pygmies. So when we got Shambhala Mountain Center, they had been camped out. That was the summer. And they'd come up to Boulder. They were camped out in the mountains. And they all were waiting for us to get this land because we had contracted for it. And they were going to move up and start living there. And we had a meeting in Rinpoche's house in 4 Mile Canyon with them to prepare. And they were saying, "Please, we want you to move up and lead us, to live up there with us." And I remember him saying, I guess this is okay, him saying, "I'm not going to be the cow so you can suck off my tits." And so we waited, and we took possession of that land on September 17th of 1973, I think. No, 2. It was 1972. And it had to be 72, unless it was 71. I think it was 72. And on the day before, on September 16th, it dropped 4 feet of snow on that land. And the pygmies went up, and a few other people, and they dug out the snow, and they built A-frames, no running water, no heat, and put up A-frames with insulation inside, and they lived there through the winter. Amazing, huh? Really interesting story. And there's a guy who's written all this up. One of the pygmies is named Jim Lowry, and he wrote a book about it, about the pygmies and meeting Trungpa Rinpoche. And there's a chant written to Trungpa Rinpoche. I think Trangu Rinpoche wrote it, where he says that Trungpa Rinpoche tamed untamable beings. And in this, it's a devotional chant. So that's what Jim named his book, Taming Untamable Beings. Yeah? Well, the 3 basic stages. So when you begin to enter the path, when you begin to get serious, you enter the so-called Hinayana stage of the path. Yana means vehicle. Hina means lesser. So it's the first, it's what the next stage of the path, looking back at the first stage, they said, well, that's the lesser stage. Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to call it the foundational stage of the path because it's very important. It's where you begin. And at that stage of the path, you make an important discovery. You discover that I does not exist, that it's a fiction, this is a real happening that happens to people on this stage of the path. And we could talk about that in more detail another time. The second stage of the path is the Mahayana, the greater vehicle. Maha means great. Yana, again, means vehicle. And it's greater because now you realize that not only does I not exist, but neither does anything out there. Other, what we call other, has no true existence. Now, by existence, what we're talking about is something very particular. When a thing has existence, it has 3 qualities. It endures over time, even for just a second or two, but it has endurance. And that's what we think. All of this is denied, by the way. The second quality is that things are independent, that they exist independent of everything else. And the third quality of existence is that things are unitary, that they are one thing. Now, what Buddhism says is that nothing endures, that the idea of a thing enduring is just that, an idea. Because in one's experience, as it evolves in the present moment, everything is shifting as you turn your head. Nothing in your experience lasts even for a split second. It's like a constant shimmer, like a rainbow, like an image in a mirror. These are all images that are used for the arising and passing away of the phenomenal world, which happens in the present moment. This is real. The idea that something exists, that Tony exists over time, is just an idea, a concept in our mind. Just, like the word table or the word endurance or the word year. It's a word. But in terms of what we experience, nothing endures at all. You can't even measure the speed with which everything is arising and passing away. It's immeasurable. And then the second quality, that everything is independent, not so. Everything arises in dependence on everything else. This whole room happened, Everything came together, and it's going to come apart. Everything is happening together, independence. You can't find anything in true independence of anything. It's just not possible. It doesn't happen. And then the third quality, that things are unitary. Not true. Everything is made up of parts, I'm made up of a head and arms and fingers and fingernails and cells, and my cells have parts, and if even an atom, which is circular, has parts. It has the circle and it has the center, and the circle has parts. It has the right side and it has the left side. So in this sense, nothing has any existence. It's all a constant appearance. And that is the second truth that one learns at the Mahayana. This is called the discovery of emptiness. That the world is empty of any kind of true existence. It's a constant, magical arising and passing away. And that phenomena, which don't actually exist, nonetheless appear. And they appear, but they don't exist. They have no existence in the sense that I described. And the person on that stage of the path is progressing towards enlightenment. They have discovered freedom, fundamental freedom from suffering. Even at the first stage of the path, the discovery of egolessness, brings a tremendous degree of freedom from suffering. Because suffering inheres in I. I is this big sack of woe we carry around. Me, 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 me. It's so sad. It's so past and future oriented. All the things that I've lost that I used to have, my youth, my money, my love, all of the things. And all the things that are terrible things that are going to happen to me in the future, I'm going to get old and ugly and fat and poor and unloved and hated, and I'll die and I'll turn into worms and, be worm food and all that stuff. And all of that inheres, in the concept of I. So even at the Hinayana stage of the path, beginning to realize that I is just a fiction, a story that goes away whenever we come back into the present moment. That's a tremendous understanding. At the middle stage of the path, it goes much deeper. And that's the stage where one begins to actually move toward becoming fully enlightened, a Buddha. And that is the end of the Mahayana stage of the path, is the achievement of Buddhahood and the entrance into the Vajrayana or Tantrayana. And that is all about sacred world, the Tantrayana. Because at the level of enlightenment, the individual is seeing the world as fundamentally sacred. And what that means is that it's fundamentally of value, fundamentally worth being here for no reason, no external reason. It's just fundamentally worth being here for. And for that reason, that's why it's called sacred. And at the Hinayana stage of the path, one is trying to achieve freedom from suffering. And to the extent that one does, one revels in that, and one is glad of that, and you sort of are absorbed in that, in having achieved that kind of freedom from suffering. At the middle stage of the path, having achieved this understanding of emptiness, which is a further freedom from confusion, then one becomes inspired to help other people. One sees their suffering, how they're stuck in this false belief in I and other, dualism, and how much pain and suffering it causes them. And the person at that stage of the path, which is called a bodhisattva, an awakened being, they're awakened to reality, they want to help other people. They're terribly inspired to do that. At the Vajrayana stage of the path, the person goes beyond that, and all they want to do is play. They're playing with the world, and they're enlightening other people. There's always that. That never goes away, that desire to be of benefit to others. But now there's this tremendous delight in the phenomenal world. And the practitioner, they say, dances and plays with the world because there's really nothing else to do. They're in love with it. It's a constant act of lovemaking and curiosity and exploration. So sense of humor, let's come back to that, because this is all bound up in this. You see, the problem is that when we are bound up in spiritual materialism, the idea that I am going to get something, it's very serious business. I has to get what they need to get. I need to make progress on the path. I need, to get some bang for my buck. If I'm going to put my money and my time and go sit, for a week and gaze at my navel or watch my breath or whatever it is and spend $1,000, I want to see some results. So it's really serious. I mean, there's no humor there, And that's why in this chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche is talking so much about spiritual materialism, because it's the antithesis of humor. When you have humor, you begin to come into the world. In fact, you're heading towards sacred world. See, sacred world, there's no place to go. All you want to do is respond, be responsive. It's like dance, The person takes a step forward, you take a step back. Person takes a step back, you take a step forward. It's this constant interaction of communication. Call it lovemaking, like that. That's Tantra. That's why Tantra is so much connected with sex, because it's all about that constant interplay between male and female, between yes and no, between you move forward, the other person moves back. Trungpa Rinpoche had a mother-in-law. She was a dear friend of mine. She was an interesting woman, an English woman named Elizabeth Pybus. Actually, she was South African by birth, but she became very English later in her life. And we used to have these events. He wanted to help people uplift themselves, you see. And we had these Shambhala assemblies, which was basically creating sacred world. And how do you create sacred world? Well, one thing you do is you celebrate. You celebrate this life. How do you celebrate? You have parties. You dress nicely, You dress beautifully, not only for yourself, but for other people, so they can see you, and see how beautiful, you look. And we had the first Shambhala assembly, and Trungpa Rinpoche asked his mother-in-law, Elizabeth, who had been presented to the Queen, so she was sort of upper crust society in New York. Meanwhile, all Elizabeth really loved to do was have people like the pygmies come to her and talk to her about their love life and ask for advice, which she gave unsparingly. She just loved to do that. And so he asked her to teach etiquette to the men. Because the men, it was back in the hippy-dippy days, right? We'd stopped opening doors for women and, that kind of thing. There was no sense of manners or politeness. And he wanted that to come back, because it's elegant. And we were good friends, Elizabeth and I, and she asked me to help her teach etiquette to the men at this 10-day event, this assembly. And I said, okay, I guess she thought I had nice manners, and probably table manners. And so I went out and I bought a book on etiquette and manners, and didn't help a bit. And then at the assembly, my job, helping her to teach etiquette to the men, mostly consisted of carrying messages. So for instance, she would see that Michel de Rem, who is the sister, was a friend of mine, had, we all dressed for dinner. We wore suits and ties to dinner. And the women wore, evening dresses and heels or whatever they wanted to wear. And Elizabeth had seen Michelle going in unescorted. So she asked me to go and ask Ron Barnstone. Ron was a Mexican Jew who was like this. He was really sort of hardly spoke. And she asked me to go ask Ron to escort Michelle into dinner, which I did. So I ran messages for Elizabeth like that. And then Elizabeth had a series of cocktail parties. And my job was to escort her. And she had Parkinson's. She eventually died of it. And so whenever she was in public, she would become a little more nervous and her Parkinson's would increase. So she would hold my arm, and I'd sort of help her mask the shaking, the Parkinson's. And then I'd listen to her off-color jokes. She told these very delicate off-color jokes to the people at her cocktail parties before we went to dinner. And then her sort of pièce de résistance was she gave a talk to the men about etiquette and manners. And no women were allowed. Now, what we didn't know was that her two daughters, Diana, who was married to Trungpa Rinpoche, and her sister, Tessa, were hiding behind a screen with a tape recorder, and they taped the whole thing. And I have that tape somewhere in a storage locker and I can't find it so far. But I'm going to try and find it on a little cassette. And so I escorted her in, and my job was to sit next to her. And she gave a talk, and the gist of her talk was, and there's a point to all this, the gist of her talk was that manners are about beautifying the world, that you can create a more beautiful, gentle world, and that they're about generosity, kindness. And she said, basically she said, if the man, speaking of male-female relationships, if the man will go like this, the woman will go like that. That was Elizabeth. She must have been about 85 at the time. And it was all about romance and etiquette and making the world beautiful. That is a big part of sacred world. And she was kind of a natural at it. So a sense of humor is also very much a part of sacred world. It's about seeing the ironies, the juxtapositions. And one of the biggest ironies is the irony of our suffering as opposed to reality. In that chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche tells the story of, I think it goes like this, that there's this yogi who is living out in the wilderness, and he has a patron who sends food out to him. Various people bring the food to him. And one day, this yogi learns that his patron is going to come and pay him a visit. And so he gets very nervous, and he decides he better clean up his little meditation room. And he works and he cleans and he cleans and he works and he gets the place utterly clean. And then he's sitting there and he's waiting for this guy to arrive, and suddenly he realizes this whole thing is utterly false. This isn't him. His place doesn't look like this. It's phony. So he goes and gets ashes out of the fire and throws them all around. And then when the guy comes, they both sort of realize what's happened, and they both laugh, and they break down and laugh about it. And the guy actually has a moment of awakening, by seeing the juxtaposition of all of this neurosis and the humor of it. And there are other stories too that he tells in that chapter. There's some famous ones. The one about the yogi who has gets cracked up over seeing the mice trying to steal the turquoise from his shrine, and he has a moment of awakening again through humor, the humorousness of the mice trying to drag off this piece of turquoise. And there are many stories. If you read the lives of the 84 siddhas, they're full of outrageous humor. So for instance, the one I always love is the one about the fat guy who's so fat he can't stand. And he just lies around all day, and his family has to feed him, and finally they get sick of him. So they have him carted out to a charnel ground. That's where you throw dead bodies to be eaten by the wild animals. And they just dump him there. And there's a yogi meditating, because that's what yogis did. Yogis would see all these corpses would be in the charnel ground, and they inspire the yogi. The yogi would go there and he'd be meditating on death and the imminence of death, the fact that I'm going to die, I'm going to turn into a corpse like that, I better really practice, so they go meditate, and this yogi sees this fat guy lying there, and he takes pity on him and teaches him the Dharma. And the guy gets enlightened. And students come, and he never does get up. He spends the rest of his life lying in that charnel ground. And then there's the Rip Van Winkle one. I love that one. The guy who lies down at a crossroads in the middle of a busy city, goes to sleep for 20 years and wakes up enlightened. So there's lots of humor, and the humor always has to do with giving up the goal orientation, that sense of self-aggrandizement of me, and why it's so important for the spiritual path. Because what it has to do with, you see, we sit and we think, okay, if I can have a thoughtless meditation, that'll be good. Then I'll be getting someplace. Whoops, had a thought. That was a thought. Okay, let's go see how long I can go without thinking. Don't we all do this? I just had a moment of thoughtlessness. I just had a moment of complete clarity. That was good. But now it's gone. Darn it. Oh, phooey. And we're trying so hard to get someplace. You're laughing. That's the humor. That's the humor. That's it. That's the sense of humor that we all need in our practice. Because this is really about giving up that sense of trying to get somewhere. In fact, what the essence of enlightenment is, the irony, it's so ironic, is realizing that this is it. Nobody wants to believe that. This can't be it. This veil of tears, this pile of horse dung, you know, this can't be it. Oh my God, New York City. But that's what the teachings are saying. This is it. There's nowhere else that we're ever going to be except here, in this present moment. And in fact, what the Vajrayana teachings say, the Tantric teachings, this teaching of sacred world, they say that when you have the eyes to see, that means when you stop wanting it to be different, then this world is a heavenly palace filled with gods and goddesses. He's a god? Oh my. You know, I'm a god. You know, she's a goddess, and yet that's what they're saying. And all of the tantric imagery, Tara up there on the wall behind you. No, we don't have a lot in this room. Not too much. There's some up on the shrine there, up on the shelving there. There's Manjushri and Padmasambhava. That's a good one. And I can't make out the one in the middle there. Can't see from here. That all the tantric imagery is all about that this world, seen stripped of our judgments, of our hopes and fears, of good and bad, is sacred. It's full of beauty. Even a dog shit in the street, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to like to say, is full of that sacredness and beauty, and full of humor. We've all been laughing tonight. Humor is everywhere. And it always has to do, doesn't it, with realizing our humanity and our frailty. So sense of humor really has to do with a sense of compassion, I think. You want the joke? About the, no, everybody knows that joke, Tony. No, I'm not going to do it. Huh? You have a joke?
I have many jokes, but I haven't heard this joke, so I'd love to hear it.
Guy goes up to a Zen hot dog stand, asks the owner to make him one with everything. It's made the rounds.
I have a question.
Yes.
And forgive me, this is coming a little bit from a comedy background, because I studied comedy for a while. But I feel like sometimes the best comedy is when the comedian is like making fun of themselves, and when you're recognizing like what's funny, about you. But sometimes I get turned away when people are making fun of, telling jokes about other people. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, when we use humor in our lives, how can we use it in a way where we're not, like, putting down other people? Does that make sense?
And is there a question in this? You already seem to have answered it.
Okay. All right. I mean, I guess it was just, is that like almost a form of materialism with humor or something?
Well, I mean, you can use humor as a form of escape, right?
Yeah.
To try and distract ourselves from our unhappiness. And then it becomes very serious. And that isn't good. I think humor has to do with really coming into this kind of humor that he's talking about, with coming into the present moment and seeing the extraordinary irony of our attempts to be different than we are. We're all so frail. One person's fat, the other person's thin, another person's tall, another person's short, another person's to this, to that. We've all got our, and as Patrul Rinpoche, the great 17th century teacher, said, he said, if you're beautiful now, you're going to be ugly. And if you're rich now, you're going to be poor. And if you're poor, you'll be rich. And if you're not loved now, you'll be very loved. And then you won't be. It just goes around and around. Just wait a little while. I mean, just seeing the irony of that there's some humor in that. If you can actually, see it with some equanimity, not be completely caught up in it, wishing it were otherwise. There's no humor in wishing it were otherwise. Zero. That way lies depression. That way lies unhappiness, suicide even, or little suicides, little deaths, little forms of self-punishment and self-attack. I've become aware of that. I mean, I've always heard about it, but it's come home to me that there are people I know now, children in my sphere, girls who are cutting themselves, and burning themselves. That's heartbreaking, huh? No humor. I mean, I'd heard about that for years, but now I'm starting to hear about it more. As though, maybe it's my ignorance, or maybe it's actually becoming more prevalent. I don't know.
Yeah, that was actually my question, is to see humor in suffering. I think for people who are self-mutilating, they were actually trying to feel alive. There were more pain in not feeling alive. So physical, hurting oneself physically actually make them feel they're alive. And they substitute one pain that's much more tolerable than the other. But I think since human suffering is one of the hardest thing, especially for the person who is going through it.
Right.
Yeah, I think Buddhism could prepare one for that, but suffering comes from everywhere. So, humor. People learn. People learn from experience.
I'd like to do a meditation with you right now, just for a minute,
Okay.
a couple of minutes. This is a practice that you can do at home, and this is the way in which we begin to deal with the issue of suffering. Let's just leave it at that. So you take a good posture. It's good to have a good posture, because it's alive, it's erect, a good straight spine, it's brave, it's alert, it's cheerful. And you can have your shoulders back a little bit, and you can tuck your chin a little bit, eyes open, and gazing out at the horizontal. And feel like the top of your head is being drawn up toward the ceiling. That helps you have a straight spine. Trungpa Rinpoche used to call this good head and shoulders, sort of like warrior stance posture. And like you're ready for anything, cheerful, ready to meet the world and be a part of it. Now, with your eyes open, become aware of the room, the environment that we're in, the space. You can let your awareness just sort of feel the space. It's effortless, really. You don't have to do anything. You can be aware of anything and everything and anything that happens to present itself. My voice, the back of the person sitting in front of you, the wall, the floor, whatever is in your field of vision, whatever presents itself to your ears. Sound of the air conditioner, now that I mention it. Tactile sensations, like your hands on your legs. And your awareness is just right here in the room, no particular focus, free floating, open, easy, alive, all these colors presenting themselves to you, these shapes, these sounds. And you can just rest here. It's really takes no effort. In fact, the less effort, the better. The more the awareness of the room is just right here presenting itself. Space, walls, all the things that fill it. So we'll just rest there for a minute. Thoughts come and go. It's just fine. You don't do anything with them. You don't try and get rid of them. You don't judge them. They're just like scenery passing your train window. Doesn't matter. You're just resting right here in this space. Whenever you come present like this, into this space, resting here, open, easy, the thought of I is gone. It dissolves until it comes back again. And then it goes away again as you rest your awareness right here in the present moment. Okay? This is the practice. This is Vipassana practice, for those of you who've never done it. And I know there are people in here who have. And it means being aware of space. And it's where insight develops with this kind of practice. Because it's appreciative. With this practice, you're not working on getting me better. What you're doing is being here aware of the world, of whatever the world presents. The colors, the shapes, the sounds, everything, including the thoughts. You're just coming back. That's the mantra. Coming back to this open, easy space of awareness. And when you do that fully, every time you come back fully to this moment, there's no room for it. It's like it's squeezed out, that thought of I, by the awareness of the forms and the sounds and the physical sensations and everything else. And then it pops up again, and that's fine. You let it. You don't do anything with it. You don't treat it badly. You just let it, you see it, you let it come, you let it go. If you go off on a trip for a while, to Schenectady and have a fight with your mother, then you, as soon as you come back, you say, oh, that's gone, and you let it go, and you come back for however long. It might only be a split second, it might be a while, to awareness in the present moment. That's the practice. It's the practice of all three yanas, from beginning to end. It just gets deeper, doesn't change. From Hinayana to Mahayana to Vajrayana, that basic practice. And it's suffused with shamatha as well. The idea of shamatha is the basic idea of focus, awareness. But you're not trying to get rid of thought. Can't do that. That's too mean, too ambitious, too self-serving. So we let the thoughts come and we go. He that guy up there, that's Dingo Chense Rinpoche. He said you treat your thoughts as you would the scenery going by the window of your train. You know, the scenery has no effect on you. You have no effect on the scenery. It's the same with thoughts. He said that. And he was a very, very great teacher during his lifetime. He was probably when he was alive during my lifetime, when I knew him, he was probably considered the greatest of all the Tibetan teachers by all the sects. They all revered Khyentse Rinpoche. He was what they call Rime, meaning it was a part of a movement that was bringing all the sects together. Sort of what do you call it, non-sectarian or ecumenical movement. And he was a very important Rime figure. Well, any other questions, comments, complaints, jokes, good jokes? There was this guy at the Shambhala Center years ago. He was a stand-up comic. And I heard him do a routine. All I remember is he said, "Before I became a Buddhist, I used to worry about my life. Now I worry about my next life." Can't remember his name. Yes, Isabel. Is it green? Just press it.
Test. So Ponlap Rinpoche always reminds us to, before we sit and we do our practice, to remember why we're doing it.
Oh, that's good.
So, and I just wondered if that is, before I sit, if I remember that my intentions, then I was just wondering to myself if that is like a self-aggrandizing idea, but then I thought that it's maybe not, because if I make it that I want to, self-liberate to help other beings, then it's not so self-aggrandizing anymore. So
maybe that's what?
Then it's not, for myself.
Mm-hmm.
If my intention is, to do something, make a change in the world, then maybe it's not. So I kind of asked a question and I just answered it. So just a comment. What do you think?
It's strictly up to you. I mean, you could make the aspiration to help other beings and have it be very selfish because you want to be a good person and collect merit. On the other hand, if you practice to come fully awake in the present moment, to give your loyalty to this world as it arises now, then you will automatically be inspired, and you will automatically find yourself helping other people, because there's nothing else to do. When one gives up thoughts of oneself, then one becomes much more responsive, available. So I mean, to me, the purest form of intention is the intention to awaken to this world in all its beauty and ugliness and power and vividness, and once one does that, then there's a progression, First one awakens to it, and then one begins to fall in love with it, and then one begins to act. They say that action, the responsive action, is the last thing to develop. Its ego becomes the thinnest and is about to disappear the more one goes into action in response to that clarity and being present. So, yeah, that's a wonderful thing to do, to think about your intention as you sit. I heard a Lama, actually I read it somewhere, a student asked, we're going to dedicate the merit in a minute here, and a student asked about the dedication of merit. The dedication of merit is you're saying, all the merit that I've accumulated here, I'm going to give away for the benefit of other people, other sentient beings, so that they can tread the path. And a student said, isn't it necessary to collect merit? Because it makes, the more merit you collect, it makes you better able to tread the path and then be of benefit to other people. So maybe you should hold on to that merit, because it's going to make you into a better bodhisattva, And the teacher said, he said, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I shouldn't tell you this, but giving away the merit produces a lot of merit. So it gets tricky, huh? Nice. That's great. Thank you, Tony. They're in that folder there on the table. No, over on the left. You're looking for the dedication of merit? Oh, you see the one with the pen on it? No, you're looking the wrong way. Yeah, that one. So now we'll dedicate the merit and by this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death. From the ocean of samsara may I free all beings by the confidence of the golden sun of the great east. May the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound